We can now bring in our European Affairs editor, Armen Georgian. Armen, great to see you. The EU says it wants to see a ceasefire in Ukraine reached by the end of today. This hasn't happened for now. Given that, what does Brussels have up its sleeve?
Well, the European powers, because they're not just EU countries, of course, Delano, but this broader format that has been meeting in London today, those countries are saying that Russia must abide by a 30-day ceasefire. And a spokesperson for the German government is saying the clock is ticking. If Russia doesn't do that, then there will be new sanctions prepared. So, in other words, new sanctions are not, as I understand it, going to be just suddenly slapped on at the end of this 12 hours, but there would be work to start preparing new sanctions. That's how I've read the situation. I'm not entirely clear whether that means within the EU format or some other, this Weimar Plus format, because so far the EU has actually coordinated sanctions with all of its member states, and they've, for what is it now, 3 years, they have basically negotiated with the more recalcitrant members, particularly Hungary and to a lesser extent Slovakia, which actually those two countries said again only a few days ago, we do not want sanctions that restrict Russian energy imports into the EU. So if the reason I say this, if we're looking at sanctions to be prepared at the EU level, another round, that's going to mean some tricky negotiations with Hungary and Slovakia if the EU actually wants to hit key sectors of the Russian economy like energy. That's not something that can just be imposed overnight. But in any case, to sum up, Delano, I think the only thing that European countries do have their sleeve at the moment is potentially sanctions. But like I say, it's not something that is just a given. Okay. It's still got to be hammered out, basically.
Now, this Thursday, we're going to see Turkey essentially stepping in as mediator once again. What role does Europe have on Thursday? Has it managed to get a seat on the table, which it's been angling for months now?
I think the key question is whether Putin is going to be even at that table, because if he's not, then there's not much for Zelensky to actually do in Turkey, and there's not much then for Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, to actually sort of have a very significant role. So I think it all depends on who actually goes to Turkey this Thursday. Certainly Turkey has been a mediator before. It actually hosted a series of high-level contacts throughout March of 2022. So those first few weeks of the war. You also remember, Delano, that Turkey brokered the Black Sea grain agreement in July 2022, although that is now not really functioning anymore. But it certainly established itself as a mediator, and it's a platform that the war parties could go back to, but I think the key question really is, will there be a Putin-Zelensky meeting? Because without that, everything else is a bit of a moot point, what role Erdogan or the EU would be playing.
Indeed. Armen, thank you very much for that.